and one by one they tortured her, leather and paint and metal and soap, rank cheese in a fellow traveler's market basket, thick stifling smoke from a street engine that was champing up the gravel they fed it to make a new patch of paving, the stench from the cattle sheds as they passed the railroad and stockyards, the dank odor of the river as they crossed the bridge, and then an oilcloth factory just beyond. The faint, sweet breath of early daffodils and violets from an occasional street vendor stood no chance at all with these, and all the air seemed sickening and dreadful to the girl as she rested wearily against the window with closed eyes and tried to think. They slipped at last into the subway with a whir and a swish, where the cool, clean smell of the cement seemed gradually to rise and drown the memory of the upper world, and came refreshingly in at the windows. Shirley had a passing thought, wondering whether it would be like that in the grave, all restful and sweet and quiet and clean, with the noisy, heartless world roaring overhead. Then they came up suddenly out of the subway, with a kind of triumphant leap and shout of brakes and wheels, into the light and sunshine above and a new world. For here were broad streets, clean pavements, ample houses, well-trimmed lawns, quiet people walking in comfort, bits of flower boxes on the window sills filled with pansies and hyacinths, and the air was sweet and clean. The difference made Shirley sit up and look about her, and the contrast reminded her of the heaven that would be beyond the grave. It was just because she was so tired and disheartened that her thoughts took this solemn form. But now her heart sank again, for she was in the world of plenty far beyond her means, and there was no place for such as she. Not in either direction could she see any little side streets with tiny houses that would rent for $15 a month. There were such in the city, she knew, but they were scarce, and were gobbled up as soon as vacant. But here all was spaciousness, and even the side streets had 3 stories and smug porches with tidy rockers and bay windows. She looked at the great plate glass windows with their cobwebby lace draperies, and thought what it would be if she were able to take her mother and the children to such a home as one of those. Why, if she could afford that, George could go to college, and Doris wear a little velvet coat with rosebuds in her bonnet, like the child on the sidewalk with her nurse and her doll carriage. But a thing like that could never come to her. There were no rich old uncles to leave them a fortune. She was not bright and gifted to invent some wonderful toy, or write a book, or paint a picture that would bring the fortune. And no one would ever come her way with a fortune to marry her. Those things happened only in storybooks, and she was not a storybook girl. She was just a practical, everyday, hard-working girl with a fairly good complexion, good blue eyes, and a firm chin. She could work hard and was willing, but she could not bear anxiety. It was eating into her soul, and she could feel a kind of mental paralysis stealing over her from it, benumbing her faculties hour by hour. The car glided on, and the houses grew less stately and farther apart. They were not so pretentious now, but they were still substantial and comfortable, with more ground and an air of having been there always, with no room for newcomers. Now and then would come a nucleus of shops and an old tavern with a group of new groceries and crying competition of green stamps and blue stamps and yellow stamps posted alluringly in their windows. Here busy, hurried people would swarm, and children ran and shouted, but every house they passed seemed full to overflowing, and there was nowhere any place that seemed to say, "Here you may come and find room." And now the car left the paved and built-up streets and wandered out between the open fields where trees arched lavishly overhead, and little new green things lifted up unfrightened heads and dared to grow in the sunshine. A new smell, the smell of rich earth and young, green, growing things, of skunk cabbage in bloom in the swamps, of budding willows and sassafras, roused her senses. The hum of a bee on its way to find the first honey drops came to her ears, sweet, droning, restful, with the call of a wild bird in the distance, and all the air balmy with the joy of spring. Ah, this was a new world. This indeed was heaven. What a contrast to the office, in the little narrow stifling brick house where mother lay, and Doris cut strings of paper dolls from an old newspaper and sighed to go out in the park. What a contrast! Truly this was heaven. If she could but stay and all the dear ones come. She had spent summers in the country, of course, and she knew and loved nature, but it had been 5 years since she had been free to get outside the city limits for more than a day, and then not far. It seemed to her now that she had never sensed the beauty of the country as today, perhaps because she had never needed it as now. The road went on smoothly straight ahead, with now a rounding curve, and then another long stretch of perfect road. Men were plowing in the fields on one side, and on the other lay the emerald velvet of a field of spring wheat. More people had got into the car as it left the city, plain, substantial men, nice, pleasant women, but Shirley did not notice them. She was watching the changing landscape and thinking her dismal, pitiful thoughts. Thinking, too, that she had spent her money, or would have when she returned, with nothing to show for it, and her conscience condemned her. They were coming now to a wide, old-fashioned barn of stone, with ample, grassy, stone-coped entrance rising like a stately carpeted stairway from the barnyard. It was resting on the top of a green knoll, and a great elm tree arched over it protectingly. A tiny stream purled below at one side, and the ground sloped gradually off at the other. Shirley was not noticing the place much, except as it was a part of the landscape, until she heard the conductor talking to the man across the aisle about it. "Good barn," he was saying reflectively. "Pity to have it standing idle so long, but they'll never rent it without a house, and they won't build. It belongs to the old man's estate, and can't be divided until the youngest boy's of age, 4 or 5 years yet. The house burned down 2 years ago. Some tramps set it afire. No, nobody was living in it at the time. The last renter didn't make the farm pay. Too far from the railroad, I guess, and there ain't anybody near enough round to use the barn since Haler built his new barn," and he indicated a great red structure down the road on the other side. "Haler used to use this, rented it for less'n nothing, but he got too lazy to come this fur, and so he sold off half his farm for a dairy and built that there barn. So now I suppose that barn'll stand idle and run to waste till that kid comes of age, and there's a boom up this way, and it's sold. Pity about it, though. It's a good barn. Wisht I had it up to my place. I could fill it." "Make a good location for a house," said the other man, looking intently at the big stone pile. "Been a fine barn in its time. Old man must have had a pile of chink when he built it. Who'd you say owned it?" "Graham. Walter Graham. Big firm down near the city hall. Guess you know him. Got all kinds of money. This ain't 123 with the other places they own. Got a regular palace out Arden way for summer, and a townhouse in the swellest neighborhood, and owned land all over. Old man inherited it from his father and 3 uncles. They don't even scarcely know they got this barn, I reckon. It ain't very stylish out this way just yet." "Be a big boom here some day. Nice location," said the passenger. "Not yet awhile," said the conductor sagely. "Railroad station's too far. Wait till they get a station out Allister Avenue, then you can talk. Till then it'll stay as it is, I reckon. There's a spring down behind the barn, the best water in the county. I used to get a drink every day when the switch was up here. I missed it a lot when they moved the switch to the top of the hill. Water's cold as ice and clear as crystal. Can't be beat this side the soda fountain. I sometimes stop the car on a hot summer day now and run and get a drink. It's great." The men talked on, but Shirley heard no more. Her eyes were intent on the barn as they passed it. The great, beautiful, wide, comfortable-looking barn. What a wonderful house it would make! She almost longed to be a cow to enter this peaceful shelter and feel at home for a little while. The car went on and left the big barn in the distance, but Shirley kept thinking, going over almost unconsciously all the men had said about it. Walter Graham! Where had she seen that name? Oh, of course, in the Ward Trust Building, the whole 4th floor. Leather goods of some sort, perhaps. She just couldn't remember, yet she was sure of the name. The man had said the barn rented for almost nothing. What could that mean translated in terms of dollars? Would the $15 a month that they were now paying for the little brick house cover it? But there would be the car fare for herself and George. Walking that distance twice a day, or even once, would be impossible. 10 cents a day, 60 cents a week. Twice 60 cents. If they lived out of the city they couldn't afford to pay but $12 a month. They never would rent that barn for that, of course. It was so big and grand looking.